It's time for PaleoRadio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering PaleoRadio.
Welcome to PaleoRadio with your hosts, Jeremiah-bannister and Joe Elder.
Thank you very much for that splendid introduction, Angela. My name is Joe Elder.
And I am the founder of Occult Human Sacrifice Cultgate. I have to do that whole thing over again, don't I? That's the wildest thing in the world. The wonders of live radio. I am, of course, the one and only paleocrat, the original at least, and I'm the founder, apparently, of the hashtag Occult Human Sacrifice Cultgate. You got to go immediately to Twitter to check it out.
Yeah, look at you go, Alex Jones.
Just go. You got to go right now. It is the most important thing, according to some sources, and you'll find out who these sources are. Super important. You got to check it out now.
And this is PaleoRadio. Thank you guys for joining us. Again, the wonders of live radio, as it always is. We have a great lineup for you guys. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different topics. The first one is going to be the alt-right and just defining that and what people are talking about and how some groups are choosing to just call that a white nationalist movement altogether.
Yeah, and then after that, we're going to talk about the Electoral College. Actually, it's kind of interesting, the link that I sent to you was Tom Woods' podcast. We've never cited Tom Woods before. Hey, we're citing Mad Libertarian here, so
first time for everything. But
good. Look at this. We're going to talk about Electoral College and the whole debate going on over the majority vote in the nation and everything else with election 2016.
Yeah, which I think is going to be a great thing to get into, especially with how it's in a hot fervor right now. After that, we're going to talk about the United States' first energy city and totally energy efficient on clean energies. This is a really amazing article that Jeremiah dug up from Politico. That's going to be a very interesting one.
You know, I wish this is something that would have been written about by the mainstream media and focused on a lot more during the primary, because it kind of harkens back to Bernie Sanders and things that he put in place that had long-standing effects on ideas that cities decided that they were going to do, specifically this one city that is now 100% renewable energy dependent.
Yeah.
At this point.
So look at Bernard.
And then we're going to talk about an atheist politician, in fact, an open and out secular individual, atheist, that ran for office locally, in fact, Wyoming, Michigan.
Right in our backyard.
Imagine that. And listen, for context, folks, that is like way off what I would have imagined. How did we not really know about this person?
Yeah, I'm very glad it was a written article from Patheos. It was something that was a delightful surprise from the elections for, I think, a lot of people, particularly in the atheist community. So, hey, great news. So I think that's a really interesting article we'll get into. But we're going to lead off with why we're saying white nationalism instead of alt-right. This is by Isolde Raftery. And this is by, help me with this, kuow.org?
Yeah, KUOW. It's a radio station.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And they say, in journalism, we avoid wonk, which is why we at KUOW, okay, kuow, there you go, discussed whether to use the term alt-right. Mainstream news sites have plugged it into the headlines, but our readers and listeners were confused. What does this label even mean? And I'm sure, Jeremiah, you've got, well, as in any different group, there's tons of different definitions for one sect, right?
Well, that was the whole point, wasn't it? I mean,
yes.
How often did you hear that the alt-right is not an organized thing, it's just a bunch of trolls and it's just a bunch, it's small little factions. And then all of a sudden it became this thing where it's a very organized force, and it's absorbing, and this is my opinion, and I'd love to hear what people think about it. You can call 616-656-1680 if you agree or disagree with this. But I think when Hillary used the term deplorables, and that was a controversial thing, calling them irredeemables, and when she talked about the deplorables, she brought in a lot of people on top of the group that was alt-right, groups like with Richard Spencer, or groups like American Renaissance and Jared Taylor. You are now expanding that circle. And so when people are talking about this, that's the really big question for me. And the kind of thing that I worry about is, who decides on the dividing line. I tweeted that out to KUOW. I was hoping that they would have something to say on the matter, and just said, hey, who would wield that sword?
Yeah.
Who would be the one to say that this right here is white nationalist, and we're going to lump that into the alt-right, even if that person may be very openly against the more racist, openly white nationalist segments of the alt-right, which most definitely exist.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
And some of it, I think, may be it could be false placement, but some of it can be the result of when people said it was a trollish group. That group was not just trollish, but they were oftentimes very vulgar and racist, which is why it was an easy connection to make when people say if the alt-right became or rose up from some sort of viral atmosphere like they did through Twitter, that there's a long list of evidence of people that consider themselves alt-right that are pretty vulgar and despicable online that people have connected them to. But I think that now that it's more in a political movement, and when Hillary says deplorables, I think that blurs the line a little bit more too. But according to the KUOW, they say alt-right, short for alternative right, is a loose online community that Stephen Bannon, Donald Trump's chief strategist, has pushed as chief executive of Breitbart News. Which, yes and no. It's not like Steve Bannon has said all we do is post right-wing news. That's our job. You know, he has talked about it, but I think that was. And
it's a takeaway one-liner quote.
Yes.
There's no context to the quote where he says that Breitbart is a forum for the alt-right. Or platform for.
Yes.
And then it uses that quote, and then it moves on, tells a little bit about a story kind of about him, and then moves on to a different topic.
Yes.
And they've made a public statement about it, in fact. Which is interesting because in this piece here, it says alt-right sounds too soft for folks like Bannon and Breitbart. White nationalist sounds a lot harsher. But they begin by saying, in journalism, we avoid wonk.
It's interesting.
I mean, that's super dupe wonk. I mean, you're kind of playing an emotional Mr. Potato Head with something, with these definitions and talking about, well, we think that the way that this group defines themselves, I mean, listen, people can say the same thing about pro-life. Or pro-choice, depending on what perspective you're from, but they seem to be labels that groups have taken for themselves. And I think it's kind of the same thing with this. If no matter the group, kind of like the Patriot Act. I mean, let's be honest, the Patriot Act's totally not patriotic. You know, and yet that's the title that they gave to it. So we refer to it as that, and then we criticize whatever it is. And in fact, it kind of, in that case, it plays into a criticism of what's in the Patriot Act, to say this is very unpatriotic. It's interesting, in fact, you use this term.
Yeah. Do you think that there's something to the sense of saying that even if it's a broad brush to paint with, that seems like the same argument that people in Islam use a lot of times about their religion, and say that when you say that Islam is bad, you're not talking about this, you're talking about the group. And the main criticism to that is on top of it that people in the Islamic community need to recognize who is violent and who is not part of the community or supports those causes, and talk about them, and actually march against them, like the 2 million Muslim march that happened here in the United States, I believe it was, against Islam that nobody covered. That's pretty intense stuff.
You talking to Louis Farrakhan?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's the interesting thing too. I mean, that guy's just ragingly anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
you know, but
what do you think about? Is it that group's duty to dig out the people that they do know are in the bed of that and say these are people that are not part of this?
110%. They absolutely, where they should publicly denounce, especially when it's a highly profiled thing. You know, which I have my own criticisms of making an event, a National Policy Institute event of 250 people, too big of a thing. Just like I would if there were a 250-person event at a Muslim event where they were talking about segregating men and women. Which, I mean, you can go and find videos where there are more people at those events, but we don't make those high profile because it's what's the point of that? I mean, there's, you know, but I don't know. The idea of white nationalism and calling all of these people white nationalists and using kind of this broad brush, I don't think that that's a wise thing to do.
No, I don't think so either. I think being specific is a serious thing.
And that's why demographics matter. That would be my answer. I would say when we talk about, let's say, the scary stuff to do with Islam, we've on this show, in fact, people can go back and say, did they do this? Yes. We talked about numbers. We talked about percentages. If it was a really small percentage that believed those things or self-identified with those things, that would be an encouraging fact for us. And that's why we also say we need to be specific about looking at and admitting that it's not just a bunch of crazies, but there's also people that would be identified with Islam that would be moderate or reformers, people who want to see changes in guardianship laws and things like that. I think it's the same kind of thing on what we've now described as the alt-right, to include the deplorables and anybody even remotely connected to that.
Yeah.
I think we should just be specific about numbers. And if we did, and we were specific about alt-right numbers, I don't think we would be quite so hysterical.
Yeah. I think if you defined it a little more and we broke it down, we said something like a group that, whatever we define this group as, there's a group that particularly has made statements about immigration reform that needs to happen on a large scale, but particularly with certain groups of people. And that's a major concern. Infrastructure is a major concern. The connection between business, big business, and big business, small business, or the connection between just big business in general with government and how that works. It needs to be lax. And that there's a certain type of atmosphere that was better back in the day. That's I think the rhetoric that people have been that rang bells that they didn't want to hear. So I think when people were saying "Make America Great Again," you've got half the country I think that really feels like America for the last 8 years has been on a pretty solid path towards that. And I think that
there's a lot of people who think that America is being made great under the last 8 years.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. I mean, look at the way it was broken down. You have the majority vote going to Hillary.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal. Cultural momentum is behind more progressive ideas. Institutional saturation, including media and everything else, even with institutions like colleges and everything else, would be momentum still going in that direction. Look at any chart that talks about the end result of the millennial vote. Mm-hmm. Anytime Republicans, and this is a valid thing, Republicans can say, look at the map when it's all broken into red and blue, and you break it down into counties, and then you say, yes, that's true. That's now. Look at the future. This is as it stands. This is how those counties looked if you were to go to the millennial bracket, for example, and it would look like this. Stark contrast.
Yeah,
dramatically different.
Well, and that's why I think when people say that we're at a time where things are as divided as they could be, I think we might be at that point. And it's not to say that people can't go back and we can't reunite again. I mean, look, even during the Jimmy Carter stages, it was rough, right? And it was rough during the Nixon times. It's not something that our country hasn't seen before. But in terms of defining this entire group, and not as alt-right, but as white nationalists, I think it is a quick way to break down conversation that we don't want to get into. We don't want to get into that pool where there is no constructive conversation going on. We have to be more descriptive with our terms. Stick around, folks. We'll be right back.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
People should totally see what I've got in my hands right now.
Oh, man. This is a selfless plug, but an amazing thing.
It's the most magical thing I think I have ever owned, ever. And I don't know the brand of this one, but I know the brand that inspired me was Theracane. And if you don't know what a Theracane is, you know what? I got to do a tutorial, Joe.
You do.
It's got to be on Paleo Radio. We have to do a tutorial on this and show people different ways. It's a massager that my therapist gave me at the VA. That it's kind of like it looks like a candy cane. Like a crook, kind of. This one is a different shape. We'll take a picture and share it at facebook.com/PaleoRadio. But this thing is just amazing. And some of the only things that might be more amazing, Joe, is our Twitter It's literally exploding right now.
It is. Man, we've got a lot of interesting followers, a lot of great new followers. We want to thank you guys for that. But there's a trove of new people that are very respectable people, too.
Yeah, some people with blue check marks even. It was just an awesome group of people. We've got Jake Bateman, YBNO. It's the official music Twitter of your brand new obsession. We have him. We've got Joseph Steinberg, columnist at Inc., formerly with Forbes. You've got Sibel Edmonds. I thought that was really cool, and in fact, we got a bunch of retweets from Sibel. She's a whistleblower, Boiling Frogs, editor and publisher. She has a podcast as well, author of Classified Women, and she's starting this thing called Newsbud. We have a whole bunch, Joe.
Yeah,
I mean,
just
literally,
a whole
there's
list.
like 4 or 5 more of these people that we could go through, and these aren't even just the comments from individuals. This is just really exceptional, awesome follows, and we're super pumped. Thank you so much for following us.
Yeah, we do appreciate it, and we like to stay active on social media. Twitter is where we actually do most of our social media in terms of being able to contact us quickly. If you guys want to have conversations with us or see what we're talking about, always you can go to Paleo Radio's Twitter account. You can also go to Jeremiah's account at Paleocrat and mine at Joe Elder Comedy.
That's right. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, make sure Paleo Radio Show. If you go to Paleo Radio, if you go to that, you're going to see me back in like 2007.
And it's wonderful.
Yeah, I am literally a precursor to Donald Trump. There was a whole bunch. It's true. I was as John the Baptist leading the way back in 2007 here in Michigan. And there's video proof, and it's something I've had to cope with. I think there was a galactic study that was done that found that I was 3% responsible for Trump's election.
The same results came from the occult group?
The same ones,
hashtag?
Joe. The same ones.
Oh, my.
So, and make sure if you want to contact the show right now, 616-656-1680. All right, man. We have this interesting... it's not even an article. I'm so accustomed to saying an article,
Yes.
but this is something, folks, you're going to actually have to listen to. It's worth the time. It's Tom Woods. And this is Tom Woods Jr., and it's his podcast. He's a libertarian, very active, in fact, because he's on episode 786.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, he's been doing this for a moment or two. Why the Electoral College is great, and no one should even think about abolishing it. You're willing, you're able to go and check it out for yourself, come up with your own arguments. But this is what they had to say. They said, why did Hillary win the popular vote but Trump won the election? This is a big question that people are asking like crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you're hearing this a lot. And it wasn't just asked this time. This is something that also happened with Gore and Bush.
Of course.
Yeah, where you have something like this happen. In fact, it's happened 4 times in presidential history. But there's a couple individuals that Tom Woods brings on. He brings on Brian McClanahan, Ph.D. historian and author of Founding Fathers' Guide to the Constitution. He is over at freehistorycourse.com. Also, Kevin Gutzman, Western Connecticut State University. It's where he's with. And he wrote Thomas Jefferson, Revolutionary. It's slated for release in 2017. Both these guys think that the Electoral College is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, well, I don't think that it's something we should get rid of. I think there's a couple very serious changes we could make, but I don't agree with the entire popular vote. He did a interesting analogy, Tom Woods did. This is just an article, if you guys do want to read it, part of his blog, tomwoods.com, where he explains a World Series scenario between the Red Sox and the Mets. And he basically adds up the scores, and it turns out that the Red Sox definitely outscored the Mets, but the Mets had won the series by how many games they had won. And that's how it works. You can actually outscore your opponent in 7 games in basketball, but still lose the series.
That's how it's played.
That's how it's played.
And, in fact, that is how campaigns even put things together, when they factor in ways that they're going to win.
Sure.
Yeah, they don't even factor in at all whether or not they're going to get the majority vote.
No.
Well, that's really not factored in.
Because we are a republic. I mean, to be completely fair, it's not an absolute democracy. And I know that a lot of folks, that kind of shudders them to hear that, but that's the truth of it. The one thing I do disagree with the Electoral College, and I'm not sure if Tom Woods really hit on this, but the fact that all of your votes will go to one party if only you win by a small majority in your state. So a lot of times your vote will be underrepresented. For instance, if you're a Republican in California, your vote will not go towards your candidate in any way, shape, or form, because all of those 55 electoral college votes are going to go Democrat. It doesn't get cut up by what percentage of Republicans voted in that state. And the same would go with you being a Democrat in Mississippi. If Democrats in Mississippi had 20%, I don't know how many electoral college votes Mississippi has, but I think one thing that would be fair about the electoral college that would really be something that could be valuably changed is if a state splits almost down the line and they have an even number, you would give a one vote favor, but that would actually have the electoral college votes go where they belong. I don't think that would have changed.
So people are going to get hosed a little bit either which way you go.
I think, yeah, sure they will.
You're either going to be the ones that are hosed in states where you're part of the 20% that lost and doesn't. Those votes don't go for you.
Yeah, and that's how it is right now.
And that's how it is right now. Or the 40%. You could be the 40% of a state.
You could be the 40. You could be the 49.
You could be the 49, right?
Percent, and have all of your vote go towards the not just
down to the decimal.
Not just be neutral, but go to the opponent. Go to the person you voted against. I mean, that's an interesting take on it.
And it seems like a check and balance to say that it forces candidates to go and campaign in smaller places as well. That it kind of spreads out where people feel obliged to go because they have to win counties.
Yes.
They have to actually go to different counties and try to get rural voters. And that's one thing, and I think I mentioned it last week on the show, that's one thing that Bill Clinton, being a rather savvy politician, he knew that the Clinton campaign should be doing, and in fact needed to do and wasn't doing, was doing that because he understood how the Electoral College map worked.
Yeah.
He understands the math.
Well, and I think, too, there's a lot of positives about it in terms where it does give rural states more attention than they need. But does Iowa, the way it plays out, especially in when you're running in the conventions for the different committees for the RNC or the DNC, Iowa, why is that state so powerful in terms of how voting goes? I mean, that's just it's obscure in a way. Because it's
seemingly non-reflective.
There's many things we could change, but the idea of throwing it entirely out and saying there's no value in allowing rural voters to have a huge say in what goes on is crazy talk, because more than half of our country are rural people, and that's not a demographic of race. That's just where people live. I mean, there's a lot of folks that don't live in urban communities or inner city areas or even in the burbs of those areas, and they don't live the same way. And one thing that I think we have to think about, too, and this isn't just Electoral College, but the way people live is just different. And to be truly open-minded is to allow that in a way where, yes, there's things you disagree on when you think people are violating social rights or people's rights, but at the same time, to act like Montana needs to be governed the same way as New York is ridiculous.
I know it's an extreme example, and maybe I'm crazy for bringing it up, but, dude, you had a guy you told me about years ago who was out in the middle of the woods and basically squatted the land, if I'm remembering right. And the state came in and said, you can't be out here like that. But his concept of reality was different. He's an extreme case of that. But it seems like the further out you go, right,
well,
he said, they don't want to feel like they're being dictated by somebody far away with different values that doesn't understand them. That's literally how that plays out.
It is. And I think conversely people in cities feel the same way though too.
Big time.
Is that especially when you talk about things like gay rights, people in cities say you can have a Republican governor that because of the way he has to run to get elected has to pander to these states that have nothing to do with mine or the values of my state. And if he runs it just by expectation, he's going to do things that we hate. And I think that can happen both ways, liberal or conservative. I think for social issues, I don't think that liberals are usually as damning in the sense of trying to pull back voting rights or try to shut down like things like gay marriage, right? But at the same time, they govern very differently.
It's because we're federalist. I mean, people. That's the whole thing. We're a very diverse country. I mean, we talk about that as our strength. But these national elections, where a federalist nation is coming together and making decisions, you're going to have a really big array of values. And some of those values are going to be way apart from each other.
Yeah.
You know, and some of them in a position of losing and in their death throes, and the other ones, you know, riding a wave to many victories. And you're going to have that interplay between those. And sometimes, especially when they get further apart and one is really dying, you're going to have you're going to have reactions like we've seen over the last year and a half. I mean, that's part of what we're seeing.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Well, and because with a Donald Trump victory, and I don't think most of the people that voted for him this way. Like, we can't. I think this is very important. We can't pretend like everyone enthusiastically went to the polls voting very, very with a lot of panache and excitement about who they voted for. These were the two least liked candidates that have ever run. So the people that voted for Trump, I don't have this thought in my mind that the many people that did it with this idea of, yes, I'm so excited about these policies. I can't wait for Donald Trump, like actually dancing in the street. There's groups of people that feel that way that are super excited, and those people I think fall into a more extremist view of most of those groups. I think a lot of those people voted in a way that was disappointed with the entire system, and I think disenfranchisement votes went to Donald Trump too.
I thought this was interesting about how if there's no electoral college, that it's up to the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and that's scary.
That's an interesting thing. Like, let's say that if you had the end run, what they said was an end run around the Electoral College, which would be a national popular vote initiative, for example. The states could change their system of electors and popular vote. And at the end of the day, if you had no Electoral College, constitutionally speaking anyhow, that number, that final result, would be given to the House of Representatives, who then would become electors.
Yeah, so it doesn't get less complicated if we get rid of the Electoral College. Hey, stick around, guys. We're going to be right back with America's first all-renewable energy city.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to Paleo Radio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. And as always, guys, you can call in at 616-656-1680. Speaking of call, you've been called out by WTF News.
I was totally called out by WTF News America on Twitter. But you know what? Listen, man, I totally had to, because it was Rick Wilson. It had to do with Rick Wilson. And this is a guy I've trolled before. In fact, I think I mentioned that I trolled him in the past, and I did it here, but this time it was with Paleo Radio. And I said, aren't you the Natural Law Party guy who boosted for the CIA operatives' failed campaign in Utah? Now, for people who may not understand this, Natural Law Party is one of the most obscure political parties in the United States as an independent party. This guy is a Republican strategist.
Yes.
So I'm literally lampooning him. And he supported a guy named Evan McMullin in Utah who got 20%. I mean, that's actually big numbers.
That was the biggest third-party percentage any other candidate got in any state, correct?
That's a big deal.
20-some% had to be.
Yeah, he was trying to he's a never-Trumper guy. This is the thing. So this WTF group, he goes, are you the guy who has less followers than that guy has done deeds to get followers? Let's put it that way.
Oh, okay.
Right? And I thought about that for a second, because I'm like, oh, that's a neat little thing to say back. And it's true. We have way less followers than Rick Wilson. And I thought, sue us for it. Like, I mean, for real, sue us for that. Sue us for being the kind of people who say, you know what? We literally are proactive in our opposition to that.
Yes.
And its influence on strategy, its influence on analysis, its influence on opinions, facts, truth-seeking, all of this stuff that makes Paleo Radio so important. And listen, if you love what we do and you enjoy this podcast, make sure to find us at patreon.com/PaleoRadio.
Yes, it's an amazing site. It has all of our episodes on there free. You can always check them out for free. But if you do want to contribute to the show, the donate button is strategically placed right there for you. All right, guys, we're going to get into a political article, which is a fantastic one by Colin Woodard. Mm-hmm. It's America's first all-renewable energy city, and it's Burlington. To understand what makes Burlington unlike almost any other city in America when it comes to power, it's when it comes to the power it consumes. It helps to look inside the train that rolls into town every day. The 24 freight cars that pull up to the city's power plant aren't packed with Appalachian coal or Canada fuel oil, but wood. Each day, 1,800 tons of pine and timber slash, sustainably harvested within 60 miles, a 60-mile radius, in fact, and ground into wood chips, is fed into the roaring furnaces of the McNeil Generating Station, pumping out nearly half of the city's electricity needs. So just wood burning itself is half the city's needs.
That's huge.
That's huge.
That's huge. And again, I said this earlier on in the show, this would have been a really great story to hear a lot more about during the election, unless this recently literally just took place, unless this is like a brand new cutting the ribbon 100% now moment.
Yeah.
If this has happened even for the last 6 months or so, because this is a story that has Bernie Sanders' fingerprints all over it. In fact, it's a very long story.
It is.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, I didn't get through every word.
Every word, right? No, it is a very long article.
Big, but it's one to go back to because it literally demonstrates that you can put forward a bunch of ideas, right, that you can work on, and it works together. You can syncretize them. They work together, and it ends up benefiting in such a way that you are able to fuel your town, its electricity needs, off of renewables.
Yes.
And they have a lot more going on than just that, too.
Oh, yeah. It says, and Burlington isn't just a tiny city. It's 42,000 people. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we're not talking a town of my hometown of Everett of 2,000.
It's the biggest city in Vermont.
It's a big city, right?
42. Yeah.
And it says that citizens need to keep the lights on. They have a combination, to keep the lights on, they have a combination of hydroelectric power drawn from a plant that's built half a mile up the Winooski River, 4 wind turbines in a nearby Georgia mountain, and a massive array of solar panels at the airport. Together, these sources help secure Burlington the distinction of being the country's first city that draws 100% of its power from renewable sources.
So to do this, you need access to a lot of nearby wood. Like
yes.
That would seem to be one of the ingredients that they had. Hydroelectric power that you'd be able to draw from a half mile up the way. So they have the Winooski River. That's one thing that they have too. Wind turbines near the Georgia mountain. So they have a mountain that wind is able to. I mean, this is situated in a decent place for it.
It is.
Geographically.
It is.
I don't know how different places would overcome, maybe relying on different.
I think they can rely on the adaptability of having renewable energy is the kicker. If you're out in the desert, you're going to have more sunlight that you can sustain throughout the day, even longer hours than you can in a city like Vermont. So maybe you'd be able to make up that way. Even if, and that's the thing too, is it's great to do all or nothing, and I love the idea that they're 100% renewable. And I know a lot of people will kind of look at it and go, well, they are still cutting down trees and burning the ecosystems, and I totally agree. The concept, though, is that if you make a 20-year plan or a 25-year plan, in the history of the Earth, that's a very, very quick turnaround time. But we say within 25 years, we want to have the technology and battery systems to harvest more electricity from hydroelectric than we already do. And we want to be able to harvest more electricity from solar, which we lose a lot of in just our attempt to harness that and store it. If we can get more of that output, you already have energy resources that will push away even having to burn the forest down in the first place. So it's not an all or nothing game. It can be worked up to. And hey, look, I'm not even scared of opening a couple coal plants if there's a plan that it gets shut down and you convert the people who are working in the coal plant over to people that are working in solar and wind in 25 years, and that's what we're transitioning to. But the idea of just opening them up to continue business as usual is terrifying.
Right. And, I wondered, and I'm glad that the article attempted to answer. I wish they would have been more specific, but saying, is it expensive? I mean, that would be an interesting question. How expensive is it? It doesn't say exactly how expensive. It says that it's cheap, but it doesn't say how cheap.
That's
but
true.
They haven't had to raise the price in 8 years.
Yes. Well, because
that'd be an interesting thing to look into even further.
Well, it's something that buys its purchasing back in a way. I mean, when you invest, say you invest $5,000 into a wind turbine, and you've got 3 of them, like they did. What did they say? 4 of them in the Georgia mountains. Now, if it's $5,000 for each of them, that's $20,000, and that's a pretty good investment because if you've got that built, and maybe there are a lot more. I have no idea the cost. I'm just making up for purposes of the math. That will buy itself back in the renewable energy So the minute that thing is set up and producing energy for you, it's on its way to buying itself back, which is why you can keep the prices low. Because if you're not trying to gouge, you're consistently earning money off of something that takes very little to repair. And that I think is the huge advantage with solar and wind that coal doesn't have. If coal has a burst pipe, for as cheap as it is, coal or oil or any of them, if they have an accident, it's of epic proportions, and it's a disaster that costs billions of dollars to clean up. It's not the same way when a wind turbine rolls down a hill.
You know, as I was reading this article, I couldn't help but think of Nathan.
Yes.
Nathan is normally here. He's not here. It's Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah.
Out of town right now. Angela, my beautiful wife, she is in the call room. And again, you can call 616-656-1680. But as they're describing this, they said the other major moves would be expansive bike path, network of electric vehicle charging stations, piping, and this is interesting to me, right, this one here, piping McNeil Station's waste heat to warm downtown buildings.
Yes.
And then City Hall's goal to be a net zero consumer energy within 10 years.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
That's something. And, you know, I got to say, let's throw some props here in the way of Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids has been making major moves trying to be more sustainable.
Yeah. I believe the pyramid scheme put solar panels atop the whole entire roof. They're attempting to work on that already.
Major changes.
Yes.
Tammy does tons of them.
Absolutely.
No.
And it's like we've said on PaleoRadio before. If you're looking at it like a grid, the cost and expense it's taking to get oil is going higher and higher. That's why you're seeing people get into the tar sands, is because the work it takes to extract it is getting harder and harder. So that cost is going up. The cost of getting renewable energies through solar and wind is going down. When we find a battery that can harness the energy, that's going to hit a crossing point, and that's at the point where you can literally choose at the same expense between having dirty energy or clean energy. And people will make that switch when it's cost effective. And we are ignorant that way. It's just the facts. But that number is climbing in the direction we need it to climb into. It takes time.
Now, this city even coordinates with people outside, like farmers.
Yeah.
Community gardeners and food-minded social workers. They tend to fields and plots that spread out over 300 acres of once neglected floodplain just 2 miles from the city's center. It's owned by a nonprofit that partners with the city, and I wish there was a mention of the nonprofit.
I wish there was too.
I know, but they grow 1.3 million in food each year. Much of it sold is at a massive member-owned cooperative supermarket.
And its origins trace back to City Hall.
And for people who don't know what that means, cooperative supermarket, these are people, literally, members do own it.
Yes.
Like that's the actual model of how it works.
Yeah, and there's a lot more democratic processes that lay out in those type of business structures than there is in a normal corporate system. For instance, politically, a lot of people want to have I have a vote, I have my say, but then when you go into the workplace, it's still a very class system type of work environment for a lot of people. When you do a co-op, you actually, whether you're the cook in the back or you're the person who's just stocking the shelves, you actually get a say and partnership stock in what's going on in the company. So it's an entirely different way of running a business.
Yeah, America Beyond Capitalism is a book by Gar Alperovitz, and he touches on this in different ways that this can be done. But even in Grand Rapids, we've had a couple. We had High Five Co-op, the brewery. In fact, we've had them in the studio before. In Bartertown as well. But I don't know. I haven't eaten in Bartertown in a long time. But Bartertown's another one where the people who work there, literally the people who are working the cash register, have a share in the ownership of this.
They own part of the company.
They own part of the company. So they actually have a say in how things operate. They are connected to it and to its well-being. So it's an interesting thing.
It is.
You know, to see. And they say that 40 years ago it was a manufacturing town, which means this is a really relevant discussion to be having, right? Saying we're in a country where people are hoping certain jobs come back that may never come back, and all the people that are making predictions are saying they're not going to.
Yeah.
And so what do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? I think it's a term of, in a way, it's adapt or die for a lot of places. Business markets move, and when we look at a place like the Rust Belt is It is a result of changing economic policies, some good, some bad, but the result is, will we go back to having huge manufacturing and huge coal plants in Pennsylvania? I doubt it. If we will, it won't be for long. It's not sustainable. So change is going to happen, and good on the people of Burlington for jumping on it early.
If you want to find out more from less top-heavy intellectual thinkers, make sure to check out the Urbanites and Crunchy Cons at the American Conservative. We'll be right back.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
You know, Joe, I was waiting to do this cherry on top announcement, and my wife, who's at the boards in the phone center, came in. She busted my chops, man.
She did bust them up a little bit.
She busted my chops, because I'm talking about the fact that Jacqueline Glenn got married. It's a big deal.
Yeah, congratulations to her.
Congratulations to Jacqueline Glenn. You got to check her out on YouTube. And I was saying also that I don't know if we've ever made the announcement that Bobby and Ashley got married and that they had an awesome wedding. And there was a whole bunch of amazing people that went down to Georgia for their wedding.
Yeah, and that we really wish we could have come down, but all the less. Thank you guys very much. It's amazing. What a cool thing that they got married. Beautiful couple, Bobby and Ashley. We love them very much. Big supporters of Paleo Radio.
But the cherry on top.
Yeah.
The cherry on top. What I was meaning to build up to a beautiful crescendo, would be the fact that today is my anniversary with my wife, Angela, and we've been married now for 14 years.
Yes,
14 years ago. 14 years ago on this day in New London, Connecticut, we rented a room in this oh my goodness, what is it? Sabbatical for artists, writers, and composers. So we had people from Chinese calligraphers that were there. We had a composer from Australia. You had choreographers from all around the world. They were all there, and we rented a room to make it a little easier on them so that they didn't have to pay quite as much money. So we were one of the couples in that house, in fact, maybe the only ones like that. But we got married by the Justice of the Peace with two people to witness it. And we got married in the common room in this mansion, which is a beautiful, very large room. We had a very small, private ceremony. And then we went and we played pool. And we played pool at our favorite place, Gold Crown Billiards in New London. And we went there and we ate Chinese food. And now we've made 4 beautiful children. We've been together through thick and thin, through the loss of our daughter over the summer, and standing by each other through it all. And I love you. I love my wife. I love her with all of my heart. And I'm just so grateful to have her in my life for all these years. And I hope to grow old with her. And I love her.
Oh, you sappy guy.
That's
no,
true.
That's great. Congratulations
It's
to you guys. 14 whole years, man. Yeah. That is a lot of time. That is a lot of different things. Congratulations to you both.
Yeah. And we weren't completely obliterated by any kind of debt.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, hey, it's one of those things that never factored in to to our marriage. And she's just amazing. I'm just so glad to have her by my side for so long. Not only in my life and with the children, Team Tiny Dancer, but also even with Paleo Radio and how she loves to be part of this. She loves to talk to people on the phone when they call and meeting people and taking pictures. Even helped us today with setting up a video camera that we have in studio here. And we've actually got some cool stuff coming up. I don't want to talk about too much right now.
Yeah.
But just to say that we have a 360 camera that we've purchased that you, as the listener, you will be able to tune in fact, probably even just to YouTube or to Facebook. And I don't know if Facebook is compatible with that, but I'm pretty sure YouTube is, where you'll be able to direct where you want to look on the screen. So if you don't want to see my mug, you can flip it over and you can see Joe.
And you don't want to see my ugly mug, same difference. You want to look around and just see what kind of lights we have up there, you can do the same thing. But it is a cool new experience. We have to adapt to technology, and we love to do that here at Paleo Radio. And speaking of a great thing, when you were talking about great things, a 23-year-old atheist won her first city council race in Wyoming, Michigan, and took a secular oath of office. How cool is that?
It's amazing. And I'm being honest, man. I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know until just a couple days ago.
Clue.
A good friend of ours and one of the co-hosts of Celador Skeptics, Chris Hanna, posted this on his wall, and I ended up catching it and looking into it. I know that Darren Gibson here in studio definitely was talking about this and covering it. Yeah, we here at WPRR, they already had that down pat.
Did Darren interview her? Darren interviewed her.
Darren interviewed her.
Oh,
man. Look at that.
Yeah, look at this. Of course he did. The guy's
Yes.
at the center. He's at the heart of everything here.
And this is we're saying is seriously,
Yeah.
folks. We know that if you guys listen to Tyrone Bynum on Drive for the Dream here every day, 4 o'clock, 4 p.m. Weekdays, he talks about the same thing too, but this is an undeniable fact. This radio station is doing a lot of things here in Grand Rapids, and there's a guy that's at the center of it all that has his pulse on what's going on, and it's Darren Gibson. So keep up with WPRR here in Grand Rapids. There's a lot of good things coming.
But you have a 23-year-old atheist won her city council race in Wyoming, Michigan, which is the burbs here.
Yeah.
Right? It is. It's people, a lot of them still like to say they're kind of from Grand Rapids, but it's not really.
That's when you know Grand Rapids is getting to be just big enough of a city for consideration when people start saying they're from it when they live in the outskirts. Right.
And she took an secular oath of office by Hamat Mehta, friendly atheist blog over at Patheos. And he said, one of the happier stories to come from November 8 was the election of 23-year-old atheist Marissa Postler to the Wyoming City Council of Michigan. The, quote, Costco wholesale employee who is studying to be a music teacher, end quote, wanted to do her part in making sure the diverse voices in our community, young people and minorities, had a seat at the table. She ran for office, and she won.
How great is that?
You know, this is the thing. Did she openly identify as an atheist during the election? We're bringing Darren into here. He was in the call room here with Angela, and we saw him through the window. We wanted him to come on in here and talk about this.
Actually, real quick correction on her last name. It's actually pronounced Postler.
We were wondering this, actually.
Yeah.
Joe and I were going back and forth. Good, thank you.
Yeah, no, I was actually surprised when I saw the Patheos article this morning as well, because that was something we never talked about at any time that she was either on the Women Lib show or on Southpaws. And I don't think she even mentioned it on Cut to the Chase. Did she, Lauren? Because you were in here for that as well.
Yeah. You know, and hey, that's a thing. We've had a couple candidates, in fact, in the area run as progressives who did not openly identify. One lost.
Yes.
But did not, as far as I'm aware, openly identify as an unbeliever. And in this case, it might be. I mean, this might be a good question to ask. To say, you know, and hey, I'm glad that this individual won.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. I'm glad the ideas here that they're talking about are ideas that we generally favor and would make for a better society, it seems.
Well, and hey, look, I rest easier at night just knowing that somebody, if she didn't talk about her religious beliefs and just talked about what she wanted to do to change the community, I rest easy at night just on that. Where even if she didn't run with her religion, it is one thing where there's many people that will say that someone's religion can't be removed morally from the choices they make, therefore their religion has to dictate what they say and do in office. And so when you have someone like Marissa Postler, thank you, Lauren. Postler. We say we do every time when you have Marissa Postler. You have somebody who didn't even bring that into the table, and I, in a way, am very happy with it. Yeah, I'm grateful for that.
That it wouldn't determine the individual. You know, and I can see situations depending on the kind of religion where it would seem to make an issue. You know, dominionists are dominionists for a reason. You know, you don't want to have a triumphalist taking over control of the ship. No. You don't want to have a dominionist taking over control of the ship, because part of their religion is that their religion has a direct impact, in fact, on their political ideas. But most people, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, maybe in some policies where it doesn't make sense without that religious view. And some people might say, like ensoulment, for example, and how that plays into being pro-life.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think pro-life, gay marriage, those sort of things I think those are connected to religious beliefs in many cases. But this is something that's even more good news, is just for good measure, when she was sworn in, she chose not to put her hand on the Bible or say any oath with the phrase, "So help me God," at the end of it. Instead, she raised her right hand and repeated the secular affirmation, which is really great. They said also in the article, Marissa told me that there was thankfully no drama with her request, and that despite a pastor leading everyone in prayer to begin the event and the other elected officials using the Bible when taking the oath, no one even questioned her non-religious swearing in.
Yeah. And, this is interesting because Wyoming, if I remember correctly, we had an individual, I know somebody personally, who is a secular celebrant and wanted to just call the county to find out, and say, hey, am I able to do this? What do I have to do in order to marry a couple that's asked me to perform this ceremony for them? And the person on the phone, the clerk, said that they're trying really hard to make sure that only real pastors are able and real priests are able to perform these weddings. And this is also the area, for context, this is the area that's had a lot of conflict with our medical marijuana laws. Wyoming,
Absolutely.
If I remember correctly, there was a guy who went through a really kind of a high-profile case from Wyoming. And so this is a place that's really interesting. In fact, it's heartening to find out that someone is able to run for office in Wyoming, to not make a deal, if that's in fact how it played out, to not make a deal over their religious or non-religious beliefs. But because of their positions on other issues, the people from Wyoming voted for that person.
Yes.
That, to me, that's a heartening thing.
It's a +1 for me. It's in the win column, at least. Hey, look, small victories are great, too, and I think this is a small and a larger victory in the sense that this is the way it should be, is based on someone's political ideas and what they want to do with the community and not connected with their religious beliefs. And I think that there's a serious problem, especially with how people interpret even our founding fathers' layout of what the Constitution means regarding religion. A lot of people believe it's in defense of someone's religion, particularly a major one that had the most influence on the country, but that's not really what it is. And it's just a great thing to see that there is a possibility that people will elect someone who wants to make a lot of changes, but it has nothing to do with their religious beliefs. That is very prevalent. It's more prevalent than we think.
The question, I guess, would have to do with re-election, because now it would be a story that people would know about. It would be something, and this is an interesting thing to think about and really to ponder, is to say, how, what kind of inroads are we making and how does it pan out in power structures when unbelievers and heretics of all shades have to do the same thing that George Washington did.
Yeah.
Or that Thomas Jefferson did. Any of these individuals where they had very heterodox views, to say the least. At bare minimum, just grotesquely heterodox people, right? Willing to go and actually do to make a translation of the New Testament that takes out supernatural stuff in it and called The Life and Morals of Jesus Christ of Nazareth.
And that's Thomas Jefferson.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
easy.
a big deal. But yet when you run, you can't do that.
No.
And say that's still a hurdle that's a very difficult thing culturally for unbelievers to overcome.
Yeah. And, maybe next week we can talk about this even more, but this is worth noting, is that in a way I feel there's been a historical hijacking of that time, where a lot of people say that these people came here for their religious beliefs, to express their religious beliefs in certain ways that weren't accepted, and they left and founded this country based on religious persecution, which it's actually the country based on the opposition to theocracy, and saying that the connection between the church and the state needs to be vehemently opposed and separated. So it's just a hijacking historically. Maybe we can talk about it next week, but for now, it's the end of the show.
Here's a hijacking that just ticks me off like crazy, taking over our show. This music at the end, Joe.
That's right.
Every time.
Happens so fast.
Bothers me like crazy.
Thank you guys very much for listening. You can always follow us on Facebook and Twitter, facebook.com/PaleoRadio and twitter.com/PaleoRadio Show.
And patreon.com/PaleoRadio has all your dreams come true. See you next week.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.